Hey everyone, this is Christian-apologist.com where truth matters, and I'm S.J. Thomason, and today I am going to review a debate that I just saw between Andrew Wilson and Craig McNeill. And Craig McNeill apparently likes to fight a lot of flat earthers normally, but today I'm going to talk about this debate that they had on DebateCon just yesterday, and I'm also going to make a couple of mentions of what my thoughts are on the Lawrence Krauss versus Michael Jones or Inspiring Philosophy debate, because that one also caught my attention and I listened to the whole debate. And I think it can be summed up by this one little part of the debate, which I'll save for a little while from now, that I want to play to you because I think it sums up the whole debate, the quality of the debate coming from the one side from Lawrence Krauss. I'm going to show you one clip that really showcases the level of preparation that he went through and the what he said. But before I do that, I think I'm going to touch on this. So now here's what happened in this debate. Let me just set it up before I play this part here by Andrew Wilson. So here's what happened in this particular debate. You have Andrew Wilson. He's an Orthodox. I don't know if he's Greek Orthodox or what type of Orthodox he is, but he's a Christian. And he was going to debate Craig McNeill. He is an atheist. It's my understanding he's an atheist and a secular humanist. And what Andrew did, which was kind of original, before he started actually first complaining about his hotel accommodations at the Holiday Inn in the airport that was rather crowded. It was kind of funny when he said that. Hi, Utopia Buster. Great to see you in the house here. So anyway, so Andrew basically took the Humanist Manifesto. Now, I mean, if I was familiar with that, if I had heard of it, I forgot about it. But what is the Humanist Manifesto? Well, what Andrew did was he was trying to point out the fact that when you're an atheist and you agree to the Humanist Manifesto, everything is based on moral relativism and everything is based on people's opinions and a consensus of opinions. It could be, if you want to call it that, or collective opinions or collective experiences. We saw a lot of those words thrown around in this debate, but it boils down to a couple of points here. One is there are two types of morality. Okay, so when you look at moral frameworks, there's a couple of types that kind of stand to mind that come out in this debate. You've got a framework that could be applied by Andrew, which is what they call the deontological framework, which saying that we have these innate moral duties. God has given us certain moral duties to do what's right, and that's to be kind, to be just, to be fair. And these are objective, meaning that the duties don't change as a function of your opinions of them. God being the truth, God being the source of justice, is also what we would say there's an objective goalpost right there. So we all aim for the truth. We aim for perfect mercy. We aim for perfect justice, which, of course, is Jesus. And so we have that. So we've got this idea that there are moral prescriptions out there. Okay, these are the moral oughts. Now, if you live in a Christian world, you can have moral duties, and they're spelled out pretty clearly in the Bible, but they're also spelled out by these ideas like we have this intrinsic human value and dignity that God has conferred on all of us. In other words, it doesn't matter if I confer value on you. God has already given you innate human value. And he did that, as pointed out in Genesis 1:27. So that's the Christian framework. We're starting from a framework where we have an objective morality. The source of the objective morality is, of course, God. God is the source of perfection, and we aim towards that perfection through our lives. So it's objective, meaning it's not going to change as a function of people's opinions of it or as a function of the shifting cultural values. Now, the other position is what they call the descriptive position, meaning that there's no prescriptions, there's no moral duties or moral ought. You're just in an environment that is how atheists would have to be, because if you don't have this objective source of morality, an objective moral lawgiver who gives you these values that you're supposed to do, if you don't have that in the atheist philosophy, then everything is just shifting. It's relative. It's moral relativism, which means that your morals shift as a function of the culture in which you're immersed. And so if you're immersed in Nazi Germany, your values might be consistent with the Nazis. If you're immersed in the USSR, and you're part of the Communist Party, you might have values that are consistent with that. Your values just shift as a function of your environment. And that's the idea of moral descriptions. And that's what Andrew was trying to get at here. He was talking a lot about his descriptive values, meaning that you can describe somebody's values. You can show where they're at, say, I value this and you value that. But it doesn't have any prescriptions in it. And that's the inherent flaw of moral relativism. And the particular framework, the ethical framework that moral relativism is steeped in and can relate to also is consequentialism, which is really the whole crux of where the debater came out at. So in other words, Craig's position was that of a consequentialist. His idea was he's looking at the consequences of certain moral actions. That's what consequentialism is. It's also looking at to maximize the greatest good for the greatest number of people. That's utilitarianism, which is a form of consequentialism. So he was looking at, we want to minimize harm and maximize human flourishing. So that's what we're aiming at according to this particular idea. And so it's all descriptive. Again, we want to maximize human flourishing. And where Andrew was hammering him is because he's saying, well, who says? Like, your opinion is we want to maximize human flourishing. How do you define human flourishing? How do you define harm? That could vary as a function of a person's opinion. Now, what happened was Craig kept fighting back on that, saying, well, no, it's a collective experience that we're going to deal with, and that sort of a thing. So I want to say hi again to Utopia Buster. He says the humanist suggestions, ha ha ha. And then there's FB says there is one type of morality objective. Subjective morality isn't morality. It just boils down to personal preferences. Also, preferences can change. Exactly. That was the big flaw in the argument. Now, Andrew won this debate. He won it pretty clearly. He apparently, somebody said in one of the comments that he was the least loved debater a couple of years ago when he debated Matt Dillahunty because Matt ran off the stage early. But in this debate, he sort of commanded the crowd. He had everybody clapping. Everybody thought that he had done a pretty good job. The vote at the end was that he did a good job. In fact, even the vote from Craig was that Andrew did a good job. And Craig said that this was his first in-person debate, and the quality of the debaters before had been a little bit different because he'd been debating flat earthers in the past. So he's got a whole channel built up on his debates against flat earthers. So let's listen to a portion of this debate. I think probably one of the stronger ones, and let's see what you think. So this is I set up the debate. So we're looking at this idea of moral prescriptions versus moral descriptives. We're looking at the idea of objective versus relativism. And so here we go.
Craig, I just gave you a demonstration of how Christianity would debunk this. Now, Craig, can you use the Humanist Manifesto to do it? Great.
Absolutely.
Let's do it.
Well, so your prescription is a straw man of secular humanism. It's right. I can explain why. Right? Because secular humanism you've gone that there's a low birth rate, therefore we have to do this. Secular humanism doesn't say there's a low birth rate. Read the tenet again for me.
It says knowledge in the world is derived by observation, experiment, and rational analysis.
And then what was your prescription?
My prescription, based on my interpretation of this, is that the birth rate is low, therefore all women must be forcibly bred. Experiments must be conducted on them to maximize fertility and therefore maximize human flourishing, because science, and that is good.
So
let me point out what he's doing. The strategy that Andrew is applying here is he's taken the Humanist Manifesto and he's taken these various tenets of the manifesto and he's offering an extreme interpretation of the tenets of the manifesto to show that people's opinions can be highly flawed. And so this manifesto is no real guidance for people at all, because you can have extremes all over the place. Now, according to you'll hear here Craig disagreeing and saying, well, we have agreed on maximizing flourishing, pleasure, minimizing harm, but let's go.
You're saying that secular humanism makes a low birth rate.
No, I'm saying that the interpretation here prescriptively and what I'm reading is that this prescription would not in any way counter that tenet.
Well, the fact that there's low birth rates isn't a bad thing. It's not low birth rates, it's lower birth rates.
Is locking women up and breeding them a bad thing?
No, we wouldn't.
That's not a bad thing, or it is a bad thing?
When I'm in the middle of a sentence explaining something, that's when you be quiet and listen. I know you're used to.
I know. I'm way out of line, Craig. I know.
Yeah, but if you let me finish my thoughts, it would be helpful. If I can finish what I'm saying.
Okay, go ahead.
So secular humanism is about harm, and locking people up and doing experiments on them is causing harm, and they wouldn't do that. A lower birth rate doesn't necessarily mean that things are bad. It just means that there is less people than having lots of people. Now, an extremely large birth rate has many problems. So we can look at what large birth rates cause: poverty, broken families, people being homeless.
This is the Klaus Schwab opinion. So if you're familiar with Klaus Schwab, I believe he's just stepped down as sort of a leader of the World Economic Forum. And this whole idea is rather disgusting. What it is that we need to cut back on birth rates. And as you know, in the United States, we're at about 1.6 birth weight, which is low. We need to be at least at 2.1 for our population to keep reproducing. And places like Germany are down to 1.4 birth rate, which is even lower. And a lot of European places are really low in birth rate. And that's become a problem. And that's why so many of them are importing people, because some of these people they're importing have much higher birth rates, and they can use those people to help fuel the society and the workforce. But I digress. The problem with these low birth rates, though, is it ends up actually hurting society. And you can see that example of that in China. Now, China had a one-child policy for many years. They just got rid of it. Now you can have up to 3 kids in China. But for many years, they had a one-child policy, resulting in all kinds of abortions of female babies. And the other thing that it resulted in is right now there are millions more men in China than there are women. And these men don't have an opportunity for a wife because there's only so many wives to go around. So that's a big problem. And they're also finding having no aunts, no uncles, all that kind of stuff is also a problem. And so China is an example of why low birth rate does not work out. And when the world is pushing low birth rates and saying, well, we can reduce poverty by having fewer people, you forget the fact that with more people come more ideas and more ways to help the planet. And so there's all kinds of benefits of higher birth rates. So have lots of kids. Elon Musk sees that. So Elon Musk has already been talking about having lots of kids. Yeah, and Utopia Buster says globalist morality. That's the example of Klaus Schwab. Even China, Japan, Greece, beyond recovery. So it's a real shame. We've got to encourage people to have more kids, not try to say that we need to reduce the population because of climate change or some other baloney like that. Think about, again, who could we have killed off? You know, if people, this one person, Steve Jobs, who was obviously, as you know, one of the founders of Apple, did a lot for the world. Had his mother decided, his mother gave him up for adoption, but had she decided to, let him go in the womb, well, that would have been a huge loss to the world. So imagine what one person can really do to make a huge influence on the world in technology and everything else. So let's go.
Lots of things like that. So there's no reason secular humanism would, if there is a low birth rate, go and then lock people up and experiment on them, because that is not necessarily a bad thing. And having a slightly lower birth rate can actually help humans flourish. As a secular humanist, we're all about human flourishing, and having a slightly lower birth rate will actually help because it allows better standards of living, less poverty, less problems, less children being abandoned, less family and societal problems from having too many people around. So you have come up with your prescription, which is a prescription I don't agree with. So I don't have to accept your prescription.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. So
if I don't have to accept your prescription, I don't even have to debunk it. That is your prescription.
Yeah.
And it's not what any secular humanism would say. In fact, that prescription is a logical impossibility based in secular humanism because it includes doing harm. And secular humanists would not do something that includes harm. So Andrew, whether you realize it or not, and whether your audience realizes it or not, that prescription that you have come from, your interpretation, is a straw man of secular humanism.
How many secular humanists are in favor or what they would call pro-choice? Just put out that little nugget in your mind. There are a lot of secular humanists out there, and many of them, in fact, I would say the vast majority of them are pro-choice, meaning that they want to be able to harm their unborn child. You can't wrap that around any other way. That's harming. When you kill your unborn child, clearly you're into harming them, and you're maximizing the flourishing of someone to the expense of another, to the life of another. I hope any humanists who are listening to this can please rethink your position on life because life does begin at conception. Here we go.
A prescription's a straw man.
Your prescription is, because your prescription is based on interpretation that no secular humanism would come to the conclusion of. It is a logical impossibility that secular humanists would lock people up and do experiments on them. So to think that a humanist manifesto could include that as a prescription means that you have no clue what secular humanism is.
I don't think that probably Craig would agree with me, but I'd say in China, a lot of Chinese people are atheist. Or the government certainly is atheist and communist, and they definitely have locked people up. In fact, right now, there are 1.7 million Uyghurs who are ethnic Muslims who've been locked away and sterilized and systematically raped and quote, educated because of 2 Muslim terrorists that were around a while ago. The Chinese government was very disgusted with these 2 terrorists, so they've decided to take all of these other Muslims, lock them up, and experiment on them. Of course, the Nazis also locked people up and experimented on them. Whoops. Sorry, you can hear my dog. Anyway, so let's keep going.
Okay.
And that's fine. If you
Craig,
don't know what secular
Craig,
humanism
I've just
is.
let you ramble for forever, right?
But so you said,
Craig, calm down now.
okay, carry on with your point. Sorry,
So,
I've had the red.
here we
I
go.
apologize.
Knowledge of the world is derived by observation, experimentation, rational
Yes.
analysis. This is a descriptive claim, correct?
Mhm.
Okay. Do we make prescriptive claims off of descriptive claims?
If you want.
If you want. So if I were a humanist and I read that, whose interpretation would it be up to as to how it was applied or what the
Well,
prescription
what
was?
secular
Stop. Hang
humanism-
on.
Oh, you
Hang on,
asked me a
Craig.
question,
Craig.
right?
Oh, was I done? Calm down.
You asked the question.
What I'm asking you specifically is, if it is the case that the person reading it is going to be the person who makes the prescription, okay, then if I make a prescription here and it's not debunked by any of the rest of the Humanist Manifesto, and you're going to some external source, in your case, well, you see, there's a logical impossibility because secular humanists wouldn't do that.
Yes.
It doesn't tell us shit, Craig. I'm giving you a prescription based on your first tenet.
It's not
Hang
that-
on, stop. Based on your very first tenet, I need you to use the actual manifesto itself to tell me how it conflicts with that prescription. What you're doing is you're saying, I don't like that prescription. That's great. Nobody gives a shit what you like. Show me in the Humanist Manifesto where it is that it actually debunks this prescription or says this prescription's wrong or says this prescription isn't humanist. What I'm claiming is that that is humanism.
Okay.
That is a humanist doctrine. You need to show me within the Humanist Manifesto how it's not.
I already did that by explaining that the Humanist Manifesto doesn't say harm. It is about not doing harm. And again, Andrew,
Show
you
us.
are going back to your own interpretation. Now, secular humanism doesn't have one person's interpretation to take into account. Secular humanism is based on a collective, the shared experiences. We don't take the Bible. We don't take one
We
person.
need you in the audience to remain quiet, please.
We don't take one person's interpretation
It's
and
not gonna
say
help
that's
him
what we're
anyway.
going to stick to. Okay, we don't go, this is the thing that we say because this person wrote this and that is what we stick to. As humanists, we have collective experiences. We will get together and say,
Do you write them in a manifesto?
yes, because that's a group of collective
No
experiences.
kidding. You have collective experiences and you
Yep,
put them
and-
in a
and
manifesto.
So what we would
I'm
do,
looking at
do you
is
want me
this
to answer the
collective
question or are you going to
manifesto.
jump in and let
How
not
long
let
are
me?
you going to take to answer the
Well,
question?
I let you talk
Craig?
for a while to
Yeah,
give the
but Craig,
question,
you
so
can't
let me answer.
filibuster the
Are
debate.
you afraid of me answering the question,
I
Andrew?
just want you to actually
I'm trying
use
to,
the
Andrew, if you're
manifesto.
afraid of me answering the
Gentlemen,
question,
all right,
just say so.
gentlemen.
Just
Hold on, let me
use
pull
the
you apart.
manifesto.
If you're afraid
Craig.
of me answering the question, then
Gentlemen,
that's
hold
fine.
on 1 second. Let me pull it.
Okay, I wanted to point out, just in case you don't know what the Humanist Manifesto is, I think Andrew kind of touched on it, but I just wanted to name a few of the values of the humanist. I'm looking at the American Humanist Association. Right under it, its tagline says, good without God. And here's what it says. First, religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. Okay, so in other words, they go against the Big Bang. They don't believe that the universe was created at a point in time. Okay, so they're going against science. Okay, so that's supposed to be something they exalt. Second, humanism believes that man is a part of nature and that he has emerged as a result of a continuous process. Now, that is, of course, the argument for evolution, saying that man has emerged from, a tree basically of life, going all the way back to single cell. And so that is another position. Third, holding an organic view of life, humanists find that the traditional dualism of mind and body must be rejected. Okay, so it's this idea that, you've got a brain, and the brain and a mind are two different things. Well, we have a mind that has thoughts. So this seems like a very thoughtless idea. Fourth, humanism recognizes that man's religious culture and civilization, as clearly depicted by anthropology and history, are a product of a gradual development due to his interaction with his natural environment and with his social heritage. People born into a particular culture are molded by that culture. Well, that's true. We can agree with that. The nature of Humanism asserts that the nature of the universe depicted by modern science makes unacceptable any supernatural or cosmic guarantee of human values. Okay, that's what they're speaking about quite a bit today. 6, we are convinced that time has passed for theism, deism, modernism, and several varieties of new thought. 7th, religion consists of those actions, purposes, and experiences which are humanly significant. Okay, so then it goes on. I won't name all of them. They've got, up to, gosh, I'm still going here, and they've still got a bunch. But basically, you have these ideas of this belief system. Secular humanism is regarded in the United States, by the way, as a protected group, in case you're wondering. If you're in the workplace and you call yourself a secular humanist, you are not to be discriminated against. According to Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it's captured within the religion. So Title VII says that you're protected against discrimination in the workplace based on race, religion, color, national origin, and gender. And within the religion category, it includes people who are atheist, agnostic, humanist, because it is a system of belief that speaks to your ultimate purpose and value and what life is about. Just to note that, just a little side note. So Iran is considered to have more Christians than Muslims, Utopia Buster said. It is predicted that the mullahs will be deposed at the end of the decade. Very interesting. And so it also is regarded as a religion. So we've got a lot of religions. So let's keep listening here. I want to give you this little nugget. Actually, I think I'm going to stay on this one for a little bit, but I definitely want to show you what I would call the nugget from the Inspiring Philosophy of Michael Jones debate with Lawrence Krauss. Lawrence is the one who authored a book called, the world, the universe started from nothing or something like that. But of course, he then posits that the universe actually started from some sort of cosmic wavelengths and that sort of thing. So it wasn't starting from nothing. It was a universe from something. But here we go. Okay.
Pull you apart just to reset here. Andrew, can you ask your question one more time?
It's really simple. Okay. Yes, I agree. You guys all have collective experiences, and you put them in a thing called the Humanist Manifesto, which you just agreed to. Using this Humanist Manifesto of your collective experiences, I gave a prescription. Can you also use that Human Manifesto to debunk that prescription? Tell me why that prescription's wrong using the manifesto itself. I think you can't. I think you can't do it, Craig, because it doesn't tell you shit. It doesn't tell you anything.
Once again,
go ahead. Show me in the manifesto itself where that prescription conflicts with humanism, because I'm saying it's a greater form of humanism than your humanism.
Are you done?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. Now take a deep breath and let me talk, okay? Good boy. There we go. Calm. Right. Once again, the Human Manifesto says no harm. It's about not doing harm. It's about human flourishing. Okay. I'm not going to use the exact words because interpretations are a thing. But as secular humanists, we would get together and say, how do we deal with this thing? It's not a particular prescription of things that you have to do. It is a ethical framework. You would take the framework and you would say, how do we deal with this problem? You would get together as a society and using our shared experiences, empathy towards each other, the want to do less harm. How do we deal with this issue? Secular humanists do not do harm. That is the idea of secular humanism, to not do harm, to flourish. So I'm going to use the principles. I don't have to use the specific manifesto because I could just get into the Bible and ask how stoning people on the Sabbath because they went to work is good for society, or how not letting women speak. Andrew, you're...
So it's really interesting with his example of stoning women. And I saw the same thing. I have a feeling, and it's a pretty strong feeling, that Craig McNeill's never actually read the Bible. I really don't think he has. And I don't want to say that to be offensive to him, but I don't think he has, because he kept saying that Christianity boils down to a bunch of Mosaic laws. And so he would cite certain things that occurred in ancient Israel from thousands of years ago that are part of the Mosaic law, part of the first covenant, not part of the new covenant, which Christians endorse. So he was citing a bunch of stuff from that, saying that that's Christianity. And that made me question whether or not this person even knows the Bible. Yes, there were certain things that God had commanded in the Old Testament, and they were prescriptions that were around back then. But when Jesus came about with the new covenant, we have a new set of laws. We of course have still the same laws as far as the 10 Commandments, but we have the new covenant, meaning that now For example, it's okay if you want to eat shellfish. It's something that we found out in Acts 10. These food laws were abandoned because now God wasn't preserving the Jewish people and distinguishing them from everybody else. Rather, Jesus now has opened everything up to the whole world. He's opened Christianity up so that everybody in the world can embrace it. And so I think that's pretty important. Now, I want to say again, hi to people in the chat. I see some pretty good people in there, like Harry Stark and Utopia Buster. He says, Harry says, Craig is quite ignorant of the New Testament. I would say so too. And I think that's sad. I think that it's a good idea to go read the New Testament. And then Utopia Buster says, whenever this argument is made, I'm reminded of the Old Couple television show where Felix, oh yeah, The Odd Couple, Felix helps an elderly woman cross the street. That good deed got him smacked by the woman and a Boy Scout. And Kip Davis, he's here to troll. Oh, look at that. He's here to troll. Oh, good. So, so anyway, I wanted to show you what I consider to highlight, and I would love to hear everyone's opinions also of inspiring philosophy, because I can't resist but to show some of what inspiring philosophy said here too. So I'm going to go stop this screen share and bring up the other screen. So let me just get to my inspiring philosophy one. So what happened in this debate, and I don't know who here has been to the debate or but it was on a very similar topic. So you've got here, as you see right here, we've got, this is Lawrence Krauss. Lawrence Krauss, I think he taught for a while at Arizona State. I don't know if he's still there. And he has a PhD. And so the thing that I found the most surprising about this debate with Lawrence Krauss and inspiring philosophy. Now, inspiring philosophy has a master's degree in philosophy from the University of Arizona. That I heard. And Lawrence Krauss is a PhD. Now, what's interesting is inspiring philosophy. Here's a question: Christianity or secular ethics, which is best for society? Inspiring philosophy started off this debate by citing, I would say probably dozens, including meta-analytic studies, dozens of studies, and that he was pointing out various aspects of benefits of, probably, he didn't say intrinsic religiosity, but I'm sure it probably is intrinsic, meaning that people's like inner beliefs and the relationship with God. He didn't say that, but some of the outcomes that I've seen from prior studies of religiosity are very positive for wellness. He cited things like, you know, a lot of positive health outcomes. He talked about less likelihood to commit suicide and all kinds of other things that go on, higher levels of happiness, higher levels of satisfaction, all kinds of positive benefits of Christianity. And here's how Lawrence started his part, which I found this pretty surprising given his PhD. So here we go.
I don't like debates. They're rhetorical and they don't give much information, but so I don't generally do them. And I'm trying to remember exactly why I agreed to do this, but I'm happy to be here now that I'm here. Well, I have some things to say. I'm happy I didn't prepare that much because there's so much to talk about now. I was told I'm on a crusade, and I thought that was an interesting choice of words, given that the crusades that I know of were Christian crusades. I'm not on a crusade, and they actually were rather violent crusades. The only crusade I know was the Christian crusade in medieval times. So
You know, it's so interesting. I did want to comment on this one comment here about the Crusades. It was funny because inspiring philosophy, Michael Jones called him a crusader, sort of a crusader for the atheist cause or an atheistic activist and that sort of thing. But the interesting thing about the Crusades is the misconceptions that people in modern times have about them. If you actually look back and see what the Crusades were about, they were a number of crusades led initially by people like Pope Urban, and he was noticing there was a serious Muslim encroachment that had been happening for centuries, starting right around the 7th century when Muhammad was about, against Christianity. And so a lot of Christians were being killed and tortured and hurt by Muslims, and a lot of land had been taken away. So they were encroaching into Spain, Italy. They were all over the place. They were all over the eastern portion of Europe and Asia. And so we have a lot of stuff going on with the Muslims all over the world. And so the Pope basically got a crowd of people together and they started fighting back. And it was the idea of Christians reclaiming the land that they had under the Roman Empire. And so it was bloody. There were some parts where it wasn't ideal, the way that some of the things that happened out of that. There were definitely some less than ideal circumstances, but it really was Christians trying to reclaim land that had been taken away brutally from them, and also to protect people who had been hurt through Muslims. Now, a lot of Muslims realize this, and they're called to jihad. They're called to basically put down Christians and Jews. That's what they're called to do. And many of them are just acting that out. You see that right now in Muslim majority countries. But I digress. Let's keep going.
So to use the word crusade about someone like me is kind of ridiculous, since I'm not on a crusade to expel religiosity. I just want people to think for themselves. I'm on a crusade for education, knowledge, wonder.
I wanted to point out something Kip said here. He's right. I shouldn't just say it's just about he has a PhD. He does have a New York Times bestseller book. You know, his Universe from Nothing is certainly a best-selling book. And it's interesting because a lot of people wrote against that and commented on it years ago. I was kind of following that whole thing a while back. But he, yeah. And so Benjamin here, I had him on my channel yesterday. Great to see you, Ben. He had a few mic problems yesterday. Poor guy's been kind of, I saw him complaining on X about the mic problems, and sorry about that. So yeah, so bad history makes bad theology. Yeah, and he's an actual scientist who's actually worked in the field. Okay, that's legit. I'll point that out. I'll definitely give props to Lawrence Krauss for being an actual scientist. And it's interesting, you know, it's like you guys talk about staying in the lane. And, you know, Lawrence Krauss over here debating morality kind of isn't, I don't know if I'd call that staying in the scientific lane, because science is descriptive and morality is prescriptive. It's more maybe in a philosophy sort of a lane. But anyway, I digress. So yeah, so we got some people in here. Who's this? There's a parody of Matt Dillahunty in here. So, okay, so here we go. Let's go.
And awe, and that's all I care about. I don't care if other people are religious or not. I just want them to accept the universe, the beauty of the universe, for what it is. So to say I'm on a crusade, I spend almost 0% of my time worrying about trying to expel Christianity or religiosity. It would be difficult to do even if I wanted to. I'm not going to spend most of my time debunking some of the stuff you said now. We can talk about that later. But that was one thing. I found that really particularly irrelevant to argue that I'm on a crusade. To quote a bunch of studies, I know of no reliable studies that claim the things you claim about giving, caring, charity work for religious people versus non-religious people. I know of studies, but I know most of them are debunked. In terms of missionaries, another good choice of missionaries who generally destroyed the society they went to visit and replaced it with a Christian society, just telling people they were sinful, destroying the culture. And by the way,
I have to comment on this, and I also have to comment. He said that the studies, now, don't mind you, Inspiring Philosophy cited dozens of studies, including meta-analytic studies, and Lawrence Krauss merely says they were, quote, debunked. Oh, really? Really? And he's, of course, taking a look at, you know, there are a lot of complaints coming in from people who were in different places, the Aborigines in some places, or the original natives in different other places, where people have said that our culture came in, the Christian culture came in and took over in negative ways. Well, I would argue that the Aztecs, the Incas, were literally cutting the hearts out of their babies and sacrificing them at the top of temples to doing all kinds of stuff to their demons. I would argue that that society was, let's just say, less than ideal. And I think that Christianity came in and it has been a net positive in many ways. And so that's certainly something that's beneficial. Now, I know that in New Zealand, they've got these Maoris. The story is there that the Christians came in and sort of ruined that culture. I don't know, you know, the thing that, as they say, the culture history is written by the winner. The Christians did win, and we went into different places. But I think we've done a lot of good for the world, and I think Christianity has brought some net positives, as you can see in people's books like Tom Holland. So let's keep going.
Bringing medicine to save them, which, by the way, medicine is a product of the secular.
That's actually not true. Not true. We certainly have a lot of Christians who were involved in medicine. And so to say it's a product of a secular society. Here's the interesting thing. Lawrence Krauss goes back and says that society sort of turned around 500 years ago, kind of puts us around the same time as Martin Luther came about in 1517, and with the whole idea of Lutheranism and then Protestantism, and saying that secularism sort of rose out at that time. And it's true. And what's interesting is Tom Holland's pointed that same thing out. He said Protestantism has led to atheism and secular humanism. And I had never really put that together until Tom sort of really put that out there. And I made a little video on that kind of recently, but it's very interesting. Now, the other thing that I want to ask is, since I've got some trolls here in the chat who call themselves trolls, I'm going to invite you, because I haven't done this in a long time. If anybody wants to come on to this this thing here, I'm going to go back to have your comments. I would like to hear if anyone wants to offer comments for what they thought of the debate. I'm putting it out there if you guys want to join. Yeah, so just put that out there to see if anybody would like to jump in here and give your opinion. So who else do we have here in the chat? We've got Benjamin, Tom Holland, we've got my StreamYard thing. Oh, who we got? James Apperson. He wants to offer his opinion. Hi, James.
1 second, let me.
Get stuff organized? No.
Hello, let me change my sound settings. Otherwise, you're going to get an echo. I'll be right back with you.
Okay.
Yep. There we go. I think I have it fixed. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Yeah, you sound pretty clear. Audience, can you guys hear him? Everything's fine? Just let us know. James, I've seen your name before, but I don't know if we've talked before. And if we have, forgive me for my forgetfulness. But so what's your position? Yeah.
So you probably recognize my name partly from moderating at MythVision.
Oh, okay. That's where it is.
And I've been in this chat before. We used to interact on occasion. You did invite me to have a stream with you one time, and I just never followed through on it.
Very nice.
So moving forward from there, I didn't catch the whole thing. I came in late. Now, my understanding of secular is that it doesn't mean atheist. It doesn't mean anti-religious or anti-God. It's just neutral of or independent of divine revelation, right? So if a religious person goes home and thinks about what they're going to make for dinner that night, if they're not making that part of their religious project, or if they're not predicating that on their religious beliefs, then it's a secular endeavor in that context. It's just not specific to their religious beliefs and practice. And so when I hear somebody say that medicine came about as a secular project, now I don't want to speak for them because I'm not them, and I don't want to speak for you either. But what I hear is that even though there were many Christians involved in the project of developing medicine, and credit where credit is due, that when they did that, they weren't saying, oh, I've got a divine revelation from God about antibiotics or anything else. They're saying that, I'm engaging in this project independent of my religious faith and practice, even if I might be inspired by my religion, right? That I'm not claiming that my contributions to this project are a product of divine revelation, right? Or necessarily dependent upon my religious experience.
I would, I'd push back on that a little bit, just because I think about, like, for example, some of the beautiful artists that are out there, like Michelangelo and others. A lot of them, they wanted to do the work that they did because God had given them certain gifts. And we're told in the parable of the minas that we want to invest very much in the gifts God's given us to go out and change the world in positive ways. And so I would say that the people who've been blessed with the ability to understand medicine and to be able to bring about medicines, many ways might have done that because of their religion and their desire to live up to what God has set up for them. And so that's where I'd push back just a little bit on that. But I can see your point. I see they're not saying, like, I'm going up and saying a prayer and then developing my medicine. So,
right. Well, somebody can say a prayer, but if they're not attributing their scientific discoveries to the result of prayer, then they would be probably admitting that this is a secular endeavor, even though they are spiritual people. And it's kind of gray, and I don't want to get hung up on the semantics of it. And I appreciate that a lot of people that have gotten involved in medicine and in science over the generations have been motivated by their spiritual beliefs. And, even in the early stages of the scientific revolution, there were a lot of Christians who were involved in that project that felt like, okay, there is a God. I am inspired by my God, and I want to understand how God did things, because in understanding and studying the products of his hands and his mind, not, metaphorically his hands, then I can understand him better and be closer to him and have more to celebrate in my appreciation of him. That's all well and good. I'm not saying that didn't happen or that it shouldn't happen. If if the reason that somebody gets involved in a project that helps humanity is because they're inspired by their religious culture or their religious beliefs, or what you might call spiritual beliefs, more power to them, right? No problem whatsoever. But at the same time, I'm sure that we can also say that there were plenty of Christians involved in that project that had different motives. Like if you get 10 different Christians involved in a project, they're not all going to be thinking about it the same way. They're not all going to be having the exact same narrative about, why they're even involved in the project.
And you know what? We wouldn't even say they would. I mean, there could be 10 Christians in a room. Everyone has different motivations. I can
Right.
say personally, my motivation for doing, like, I'm in administrative work right now in a university. And one of the major reasons I'm in that, I'm in a secular university. I'm not teaching religion or having anything to do with, that kind of thing. However, when I go to work every single day, I pray that I'm going to treat others the way that I should, the way that I would want to be treated, and that I would, try to show Jesus through my actions to people. And I think that, and I'm maybe one person, I know a lot of other Christians who might think the same way, but then, like you're pointing out, there are certainly some Christians who might not even think anything of their religion at all when they're out there doing their work. So.
Right, all that makes sense. I think part of the frustration for people that are on the outside looking in at that, even the discussion itself, is to say, you know what, if there is a super being that you might want to call a god that is inspiring you, okay, fine. But if we go to the extreme of saying that we wouldn't have these discoveries in science without that religion or without that spiritual culture or whatever, then it can be frustrating for people on the outside of that, because their position is, okay, if we grant the idea of the super being exists and he's inspiring you to do science or whatever, and as a result you're doing science and sometimes it helps humanity, man, it's kind of a hard pill to swallow for some critics, because they're like, well, then why didn't he tell us about antibiotics in divine revelation? Why isn't this stuff in Bibles? Because think of how much it could have helped us then. And so it feels like cringe to them to give credit to a being who's only indirectly alleged to be involved, when if he's going to be involved at all, why not just be involved in a very more direct way?
So yeah, I think it's interesting. So let me go back, James, and so I get the frustration saying you're coming in from the outside, and I think it's interesting. I want to say what FB just pointed out here. He said science would not even be possible without the Catholic Church. Only recently have scientists become secular. The Big Bang Theory was started by a Catholic priest. Isaac Newton was a Protestant, and so I just wanted to point that out because that's actually a pretty good point. But James, let me go back a little bit. And ask you about you, because I don't know very much about you. Were you raised in a Christian family, or were you raised in a secular atheist family, or how were you raised, and how did you come to the opinions you have today?
Right. So I was born into an old school Catholic family. And after a while, my mother began to shop around for a different version of Christianity because she didn't feel like that was where she was supposed to be. And she just jumped around to different versions of Christianity for my entire childhood. And after I went my own way as an adult, I held on to the idea in a very kind of nebulous sort of way that Bible equals God equals true. Just, that was a real clarified on the specifics. My idea was, surely there's a God, surely he cares, surely he's given us something that we can use to make sense of him and our place in the world. And I don't see anything in front of me for that project except for Bibles, right? This is the world that I'm born into. And so I tried to make sense of God within the context of he's in there somewhere, let me find him. And it wasn't until probably age 41, and I'm in my early 50s now, so more than 10 years ago, that I deconverted from that general idea of God. And it was a Dark Matter 2525 video that did that for me. It was about the flood. And it wasn't saying that God couldn't do a flood or couldn't use God powers to do things. It was that clearly the flood as described didn't happen. And once I realized that, and this happens with a lot of people, right? Because they're coming from a fundamentalist idea about how to interpret Bibles. And because of that, when fundamentalism doesn't hold up to be reliable, a lot of people end up completely deconverting from the entire idea rather than looking for nuance and meaning and things like that. And so once I realized that I had just pushed hard against the disillusionment, then I began to re-examine that as well. And so currently where I'm at, is I kind of like panpsychism or Taoism, right? So I'm in this general idea of I think that there's something to it, right? To love and purpose and all those things. And I think that dry atheism probably doesn't have all the answers that it thinks it has. But at the same time, I don't use the word God personally because it comes loaded with so much cultural baggage, so many different ideas about what that even is. And I just feel like the conversation can be sharper and more clarified without the word. And so I just don't use it.
Interesting. I think that's very interesting. I raised my kids like that. I was basically, when you said your mom did, I was born and raised in the Catholic Church. I left by the time I birthed my kids. I was married in the Lutheran Church in 2003, had a couple of kids, and it was floundering all over Christianity. I was in a Baptist church for about over 10 years in thinking that was right. And then I started looking into it and ended up back in the Catholic Church. But because I had my own little straw man of what Catholics believed because I wasn't paying attention when I was young. And so, but it's really interesting because I look at you and I think, are my kids going to end up one day at 41 suddenly saying I don't believe in God at all because of maybe starting off with certain fundamentalist beliefs at some point? I actually agree with you. I think some of the fundamentalist beliefs right now, because they go in stark contrast to what we're seeing in the scientific world, like for example the age of the universe and that sort of thing, I think that they can be kind of dangerous because I think that if kids are raised in that where they're told that everything's 6,000 years old and suddenly they go out and they see evidence from plate tectonics or something and take a historical geology class like I did, and then see that the way the plates came together billions of years ago, well that's a little bit of an issue.
Right.
So
Exactly.
that's an issue. So yeah, no, I can see I see the big challenges with that. And so yeah, so but it would, let me ask you this, James. I asked this yesterday to my friend here who's in the chat, Ben. I don't know if he's still here, but and I also want to say thanks to Mojo for subscribing. I appreciate that. I appreciate anyone who likes and subscribes. I seem to be hemorrhaging subscribers lately, so that's always good. But James, let me ask you, if and I said this to Ben yesterday, if Jesus were to appear to you and you knew it was him, there was no doubt in your mind at all it was him. He shows up, knocks on your door, and you open the door, and it's definitely him. There's light, there's all kinds of ways to know this is him, and in your psyche, in your mind, you know it's him, and he offers you the opportunity to follow him. What would you say?
I would say, well, since you're here, let's make the best of it. Let's do coffee. I'll grab my coat, right? Because this needs to be the beginning of a long and careful discussion between two people. And so that was just the beginning of it. And then where that conversation goes, and then how I feel about where that's gone would depend on what they say and how I feel about it. So, there are things that are in Bibles where it says Jesus says this or Jesus does that, where I'm a fan. I'm like, well, yeah, those are wonderful ideas. I like that lots, right? And even when I deconverted, I still held on to that idea. I did not throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, right? So it's not all bad. There are things obviously in Bibles that I don't like or don't agree with or don't find credible, but there are things that I do. And so I try to be nuanced and fair about it. But, there are essential aspects of Christian theological structures that I don't think I could. Man, it would be a hard sell. I would listen. I would consider it, right? And that goes wherever it goes.
Mhm.
But I just don't know. So for me, one of the big issues is authority, right? Moral authority as an idea. And the problem that I have with moral authority isn't that I think for sure there can't be such a thing. The problem I have with moral authority, when a conversation is predicated on it, is that it's a subtle or powerful factor of influence on how I interpret what people are saying and how I accept it. So if I come to you and I just say I've got a set of ideas and I present data and I present logical arguments and I couch that in the context of ethics, then you can evaluate whether or not you think the data is reliable, whether or not you think the logic is valid, and whether or not you think the ethics are sufficient, right? And then you can decide if there's something of value in there for you. But if I come to you with exactly those ideas and I predicate that on moral authority, where you're beholden to give my voice weight and to suspend some of your critical considerations or else kind of a thing, that you're beholden to give my voice weight just because of authority, then that's not a fair way to engage with another person on the issues, because I don't want them under the influence of feeling beholden to my voice as being superior to theirs. I instead want to come to them as an equal, as a fellow human being in the world, so that they're free to simply evaluate what I'm saying on the same criteria that they would evaluate anything else that I say to them. And if the facts bear out, if the logic bears out, if the ethics bear out, then they're going to be influenced as such, and more power to them. Great. But does that make any sense why I don't want to come?
Yeah, well, actually, you're making a lot of sense. I want to say something. First, I want to say I've got some funny names in the thing here. I want to say hi to Alexis Coral, but Das Kapital is obviously a take on Marx, and so I think that's funny. And
Oh,
also,
yeah.
somebody's got a take on Matt Dillahunty in here that's pretty. People are showing their humor, and I think that I just wanted to two things about your moral authority. I think that's really interesting because it circles back to the first debate I just put out there, because the big question was where is the what was the word we're using here? It was normative authority. Like, for example, if you have your ethical structure and maybe you're based in consequentialism or something like that, where you're minimizing harm and maximizing human flourishing, where is the normative authority to be able to take whatever that structure is and apply it to the world? Right now, we've got a government in our country, different governments that have that certain authority structure. But if the government goes wrong and their application is awful, like you see in the USSR, former USSR, and China and other places like that, then how do you argue with them of what is right when you have no higher authority to go against?
Right. So it's a fair question. So how I understand authority is that authority is a game that we play. Now, I'm setting that aside from the issue of whether or not there's a God that has authority. I'm just talking about our human experience of it as we relate to other human beings. Authority is a game that we play. It's a game that we agree upon. I'll pretend that authority is a real thing because it's the structure of ideas that we're coming to say, let's agree on creating a union of people that have say over how other people are supposed to behave, right? It's predicated on authority as a narrative, right? But I've never really been big on as a fan of that kind of a thing. The idea of government is consent of the people. They rule by consent of the people. Well, I was born into the system. I did not consent to the American government telling me how to live my life. However, while I'm living in this structure of a political and ideological and cultural structure, I appreciate that most of the laws that have been passed by my government and that are enforced by my government are laws that I myself would have written if it were up to me. Most of our laws are so well thought out in terms of my rights end where yours begin and vice versa. Equitable engagement within the system where nobody is preferential above another person. I love that idea so much that every time I see a law that reflects that ideal, I'm 100% endorsing of it. Oh yeah, I'm so glad we have it, because I want to live in a society that is maximally safe for myself and for my children, for other people, that is as equitable as we can make it be, because that's conducive to good health and good function for everybody within that system. And
Right.
Right.
Let me just add, because I think you're saying we want equitable. We certainly want that, and part of the American dream is the idea of all men are created equal. We're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, the right to life, the right to liberty, the right to pursuit of happiness. And you and I would probably say that's great. Don't you agree with that?
Sure. I want those things for me, and I want those things for other people as well.
Okay, so then and I think that's the idea of equality. Now, that said, there's differences between people. Some people are much more endowed with gifts than others. I mean, you look at somebody like Elon Musk, and I saw this story about Elon Musk had a dorm mate, and the dorm mate was really frustrated because he couldn't live up to what Elon was doing in the dorm that was like way different. And somebody's like, well, that your dorm mate's Elon Musk. He obviously came with more intellectual horsepower than most people. So that's just I'm just saying that. So we live in a system that's performance based. In other words, so if you perform really well, you're going to end up achieving higher outcomes than people who don't perform as well. Would you agree with that?
I agree that there's an element of that. I don't think we're entirely faithful to it, but there's this sentimentality amongst many people in America that they want to live in sort of a meritocracy. They want people who are the most capable in any particular regard to be the people that ascend into positions where they're responsible, to use those abilities. And we want, if a job requires a certain amount of intellect, we definitely want somebody in that job who has sufficient intellect, for example. That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, no, I think we agree on that. I jumped ahead on this debate here. I want to see if I play a little portion of maybe IP or of Lawrence and see what your opinions are on that. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so let me just see. I know that they were doing a back and forth right around this period. I don't know if I'm landing right at the exact right time, but let's see.
Philosophers believed the universe was rational, that it had laws that could be discovered, and they thought they had minds that could actually do. No, the Greeks actually were doing something called proto-science. They were not actually doing real science.
Oh, really? Okay, who determined the circumference of the Earth? Christians or the Greeks?
It was the early Greeks who did
Yeah,
that,
I know. So they were doing science.
They were doing proto-science.
What is proto-science?
Okay, so what they often did is they'd get in rooms and they discuss various different.
No.
Are you gonna let me finish, or are you just gonna keep interrupting?
How
me?
did we determine the circumference of the Earth? Tell me. Do you know?
Do you know
how they proto-science did it?
Yes, it was in Egypt.
Did you read it in some history book? Tell me.
Egypt.
No, tell me how it was done.
Okay, let me.
It wasn't from a Bible. It wasn't from a thing. It was someone doing a damn experiment.
Yes,
that's science.
Exactly. Okay. Are you done?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Calm down. You'll be okay here. Okay. So let's go back again. Early Greeks were often doing proto-science. They would make minimal observations, and then they would try to develop these different philosophies they could use to find out what is going to be the most coherent worldview. Okay, so what happens is that through the Middle Ages, as Toby Huff and Edward Grant note, science starts to become developed as its own institution. It comes out of philosophy. This comes out of the Middle Age tradition, and it was scientists borrowing from the Greeks and from Christian traditions that allowed them to develop science into what it is.
Okay, so he's making an assertion there. What do you think of that, James?
I would need to hear the rest of his argument about what he thinks people were borrowing from that is due specifically to Christianity.
Okay, you want me to continue it for a sec?
Because I won't have an opinion about that until I hear his example.
Okay, let's hear what he says.
I would never say Christianity is the only thing that gave rise to modern science, but it was crucial for it. That's my point.
Okay,
so go back to your main point. We're talking about the modern day.
But my point was that the Greeks were able to determine use rationality.
Of course.
I mean, you must admit, if you like philosophy, that the Greek philosophers from Socrates and Plato were useful thinkers, secular thinkers. They believed at that time they believed in many different gods, and the Greek gods were by far more interesting than our gods. They had a lot more fun.
You're claiming they're secular?
What?
Are you claiming they're secular?
I'm saying that they were when they were doing science. That's the important thing.
So anytime we do science, it's secular.
Absolutely. And here's the argument. It was a very famous biologist who said this. When he goes
biologist, remember that, biologist, not historian or philosopher.
Exactly, a scientist.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my point. He said, when I go in the laboratory, and by the way, there are a number of scientists who are deeply religious, which is proof that you can hold two inconsistent notions at the same time. But what he said is when he goes in the laboratory, he is an atheist because he's assuming with no divine being is twisting the dials and determining, what the results of his.
Okay, so what do you just want to stop that for a second? He's kind of very similar to what you were pointing out a little while ago, James. It sounds like you at the beginning of this chat.
Yeah. So, I think the subtext here needs as much attention as the text, right? Because there's these underlying motivations for both sides of this debate that are really the meat of what they're getting at. The arguments that they're using are being used to forward the unspoken narrative about why this matters to them. And so I think it's important to understand that we are all part of a larger living, breathing whole, the thing we call humanity. And there is nothing that happens in science that doesn't involve faith in some ways. And there's nothing involved in science that doesn't involve, autonomous, what I would call secular thought processes too, right? It's a conglomeration. It's a big, beautiful mess of ideas and motivations. And so if somebody wants to say that, if the underlying reason for someone like Mike Jones to argue what he's arguing is that he wants to say, let's celebrate Christianity, then I would say, how about we celebrate the fact that the idea of Christianity was inspiring to people in certain kinds of ways that were sometimes very productive and helpful for humanity. And at the same time, were sometimes counterintuitive to the interests of humanity. It's messy, right? It's not all one thing or the other. And the same thing goes with secular projects and thinking. In some ways, secular thinking has been advantageous to humanity, and in some ways it has not been, right? I'm not going to celebrate the advent of the atom bomb or the times we dropped one, right? And those were secular projects too. So I don't think there's any particular one way of thinking about God in terms of he exists versus doesn't, or he's inspiring versus isn't. I don't think that all or nothing approach even makes sense. I just think that people are a beautiful, messy kind of a happening, and that we're all involved in the same larger project, even though we would love to be able to score points for our team to say, oh, this belongs to us, or whatever. I don't
You
think.
see, the problem with that, you're saying a lot of this is just happenstance. We're just lucky cosmic beneficiaries of accidents and everything else.
Well, I'm not
That's
sure.
a very depressing way to look at the world when like Christianity helps explain so much in our lives. And your point of view, unfortunately, is just like we have this game in our mind. We're playing this little social moral game, and it's just a game, and there's no real reason that we do it. We just do it because we're acting out this part in this larger play and cosmic, and there's no divine guidance. There's no oversight. There's just us somehow just landing on this planet.
Well, there might be. No,
How do you
you're
think
right.
we landed on this planet?
I'm trying to meet you halfway. I really, really am. Right. I'm not trying to come at this some kind of hard atheist to negate the Christian project or the Christian culture or movement or whatever else. Lately, I've been thinking more in terms of something like panpsychism or Taoism, and lean toward the idea that there is a something. I don't know that it's a someone with an agenda and political ambitions and writing books. I don't know that, but I'll grant that I think that there's a something, some source that permeates the human experience and precedes the human reality, that motivates love and purpose and connection and beauty, that goes beyond what we can explain under a microscope or in a scientific lab. And it could well be that Christians are intuiting that they're picking up on that. And so, but at the same time, I would say the same thing about Buddhists and Hindus and Muslims in certain ways, in a certain contexts, and it's the same thing when people tell me about miracles. They're like, I've experienced miracles in my life. I've witnessed that out in the world. A dry atheist is going to say, no, I think you're delusional, but I don't go there. Instead, what I say is, you might be right? There might be something to that. But if I grant that for the Christian, then I'm going to want to grant that for other people too. And so my idea is maybe this, whatever it is, it doesn't play favorites. Maybe it's tapping into it isn't contingent upon one particular religious narrative or culture. Maybe the inspiration and the beauty and the purpose and that which precedes and that from which we flow, maybe whatever that is that some people are calling God, isn't accurately described by religious narratives, but instead religious narratives are simply humans' attempts to make sense of the great mystery, to make sense of whatever that is.
I'm glad that you're actually investigating Taoism and Buddhism, and I'm really glad, because I feel like that's at least opening a door to understanding there's a spiritual component to our lives. And I think Sam Harris is doing the same thing, from what I understand.
Right.
So if that's what it takes to you to get through the door into understanding their spirituality, I think as you pursue that more deeply, you'll realize you might come back to Christianity. I mean, that happened to me. I never really left Christianity, but I was a very weak Christian, and I looked at the Eastern faiths and I thought they were very exotic. And but I also realized there's, I would argue in this whole idea, like what you're mentioning here, when they talk about dualism in some of these other faiths, they've got the idea that good and evil are on equal footing. And C.S. Lewis has pointed out that it's actually not like that. You've got good, that's the ultimate, and you've got evil, which is a corruption of the good. And that's kind of like the idea of Satan falling from heaven. And so I think as we get out there in the world and you understand that we definitely have evil out there, and I would say there's a spiritual battle going on out there, and it seems pretty clear with some of the insanity that we've seen with certain people. I think that leads us to understanding there must be a moral lawgiver who is intentional, we're not just cosmic beneficiaries of this spiritual or even just physical world.
I mean, I can't speak to that. If the source that I'm talking about that is nebulous to me, that's mysterious to me, if it's a someone that is autonomously sentient and self-aware, that has a sense of name and a sense of biography, right, and a sense of intentionality. If all those things are true, I just don't have a way to know that that is true. And I'm not saying that it isn't, and I'm not saying that it's irrelevant. If there is such a being, then they probably are relevant, right? It probably would go beyond deism, if that's the thing. I just don't know that it's the thing, and I'm not aware of a good reason to think so. But at the same time, I never say to a Christian ever that you're wrong about the such an entity existing, or that you're wrong about miracles, or that you're wrong about whatever. I don't tell them that at all. My position is simply that I have a different framework of ideas and how I negotiate with those ideas, and Christian theology doesn't map onto those. And so it would take, if Jesus showed up personally at my door, like you were asking, and wanted to have that discusussion, I would listen. I would seriously.
So when you say it doesn't map onto your, like, what is it exactly that, I want to say hi. I'm going to throw this out here too, because I just see Otangelo and he always likes to stop in. So I don't know if he wants to stop in today too, but let me just see if I can put this in the chat. Hold on one second. No, I wanted to ask you though, what is it about Christianity that goes, because sometimes people say, well, I'm a supporter of gay rights or something like that, and therefore I can't be a Christian, or I'm supporter of this or that. And so what is it in your mind that what's lacking in Christianity that you can't get on board with?
Well, there's several different things. Now, one thing, when I deconverted from that general domain, the most recent religion that my mother had been involved with at the time was the Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, I understand that you're not going to endorse the JWs, and that's fine. But something occurred to me about the JWs, and it goes back to a realization I had when I was a very young boy. I was watching Star Trek, the original series, with my grandmother. And then they were getting on the teleporter and being teleported to other locations. And it occurred to me, even though I was a very young boy, wait a minute, they're being killed and rematerial. They're being made again somewhere else. The person that arrives on the planet's surface, that's a clone. That's a duplicate. That's not the original person. And I realize that this can be argued from a philosophical perspective, but it's the beginning of my interest in philosophy of identity. And so when I was studying with Jehovah's Witnesses, it occurred to me that they've got the same problem, because they believe that when you die, you're completely dead. God simply remembers you. He remembers how to put you back together. And then in this quote unquote new system, he makes you again. And then I realized, you're talking about replacement. He's going to replace me with a perfect clone that has a general sense of them being me, but they're not me. It's a lie. And I'm like, even if the Jehovah's Witnesses were correct, talk about not a reward system, right? It's not a reward to say, oh, well, after you die, God's going to eventually replace you with somebody better. Like that, how does that benefit me at all?
It's interesting. So your mom went from because I never went to that extreme, to the Jehovah Witness. That is an ultimate extreme. That's completely rejecting so many tenets of Christianity.
Right.
It rejects the Nicene Creed. It rejects everything. I mean, it's now Jehovah Witness, and I always get it confused with Mormons as far as what exactly they believe, because I haven't studied either that well.
Mhm.
But Tim, can you tell me, like, what do they think of Jesus? Is that the one that they believe Jesus is like a brother of Satan or something like that?
Right. So they believe that Jesus was the first being created, and that through Jesus, God created everything else. And so they believe that Jesus was the highest of angels in that context.
So an angel, okay.
An angel, like the supreme angel, Michael the archangel, in fact.
So that's what they believe. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And so, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to say hi real quick to Otangelo. He's here. We haven't talked to him in a while. So hi, Otangelo.
Hi, yes, Jay. Hi, James. How
Hi,
are you?
Otangelo. I caught you earlier having that really great discussion with JL over at Bridge the Divide.
Yes, it was good. Yes, and
I was really impressed.
Yeah, I hope that I was able to clarify some things which are still being mentioned, after so much time.
Sure. And I have to apologize to you too, because all this time I've been holding you in poor regard because of what I heard about you without ever asking you directly whether or not that was true. And apparently the rumors were overblown and not fair to you. And you recognize that you made some choices that were not ethically sound, and you thought about it, you grew from it, you owned it, and people decided not to accept your apology. And I gotta say that I should have taken it to you. I should have asked you your side of it, and I should have heard you out, and not had and harbored and held on to this negative idea of you based on a mistake you made years ago, and that you'd already owned and apologized for, and that was also being misrepresented in the atheist community. So I'm glad that I was there to have that discovery today.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I always say, hey, move on. I made a mistake. I apologized. Why still mentioning it? Why not move on?
Sure. Now, yeah, to be fair, I don't necessarily think that they should the people directly involved. I don't have an opinion about whether or not they should or shouldn't forgive you. I just know that I was holding on to an idea of who you are in the world that wasn't adequately informed.
Oh wait, guys, let's drop whatever this is, because let's talk about these debates if we could. We've all fallen short at some point here and there,
Sure,
so let's not. I don't want to
Sure.
batter whatever this
All right,
is.
right. So that's what the Jehovah's Witnesses believe. So then, when I realized that, I started thinking about whether or not all the other versions of Christianity or rival claims of Christianity have the same failing or not. And so when I think about identity, I think about the ship of Theseus, right? This idea that if you replace a piece of the boat or the ship one piece at a time, at what point is it a new ship? If you end up replacing all the pieces with identical pieces, is it the original ship? And some people would say, yeah, because it serves the same function and those are identical pieces and you have the same relationship to the ship. Some people would say, no, it's not even the same ship once you replace one piece, right? And so there's this framework of opportunity to engage with a complex set of ideas that map onto identity, that address the problems with identity. So when I think about the fact that I'm this ever-changing entity in the world, I'm having new experiences and forming new relationships, old relationship paradigms are being retired and replaced. When I think about that, I came to realize that the baby that I was identifying with like over 50 years ago now as the baby version of me is only true from a practical frame of reference. It's not meaningfully true, right? There's nothing about that entity called baby boy Apperson that has anything to do with me, right? They didn't look the way I look. They didn't feel the way that I feel. They didn't have the relationships that I have. They didn't have the memories that I have. Everything meaningful about me to me doesn't map onto that baby, right? And so I'm not the same person in any meaningful sense. And then I realized that if eternity is going to happen, and if I'm going to be in eternity, let's say in a heaven, for example, having new experiences, forming new relationships, accruing new memories, old memories fading away, I'm still going to be going through that same kind of a process, to where even though there's not one particular moment where I directly die, I'm slowly being replaced a piece at a time, and the person that exists with my name 10,000 years later will have no relevance at all to the person that made it into heaven.
James, you're you laid the longest answer forever. I'm just
Sorry.
trying to. Okay, the bottom line is that Jehovah's Witnesses, I mean, I'll just say that it's a Gnostic faith that goes way back to an ancient heresy. There's a whole bunch of heresies combined with that. And unfortunately, the early church fathers spent half their time trying to write books against heresies. I mean, they wrote against this heresy, that heresy, and there's a ton of them. They were like whack-a-moles, and it was just, they kept coming up. And so, but I just wanted to see, like, Otangelo, starting here, your opinion of the debates. If you watched, I started off talking about Andrew's debate against Craig, and then I talked about IP's debate against Krauss, and just wondering if you have thoughts on that, or James, if you do too. But let's switch back over to the debates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe I've not seen both debates, but I have an opinion on the matter regards of ethics and morality. I think that we can only have objective moralities if there is a real enforcer which actually exists and enforces them. and is an authority and says what is right and wrong. And once you remove that, then it boils down to personal opinion. And then I should ask myself, well, what is my next opinion in regards of morals? Why should that be more relevant than my opinion? And then it's basically about having no morals at all, because they cannot exist if they are not reinforced from above and if they are not real and objective. Now the question is, how is it affecting the real life in both worldviews? And I would say that if I believe that everything that is matter, that moves, and that beyond the universe there is nothing else, then there is no deity which overlooks on my shoulders on what I am doing. And even if I have a moral sense of what is wrong and what is right, if I follow my personal tendencies and want to satisfy my will, and if I have a certain tendency, for example, for something which is generally considered wrong, then my threshold to actually go and do what normally is said to be wrong, but it satisfies my will and what I want, that threshold to overcome what is wrong and doing it is actually much lower, because there is no enforcing deity which eventually there will be consequences if I do what is wrong. Now, in my Christian worldview, I believe that there is a God which gave us a moral sense, which gave us the laws of what is wrong and what is right. That means before that I actually lower my standard and actually pull the trigger and do something which is wrong, that threshold is much higher, because I know there are consequences, because there is a deity which is looking.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. There are consequences too. If I go back to James, to your Buddhism and Taoism and stuff like that, do you believe in? I know some people in Eastern faiths believe in reincarnation. Do you believe in that?
So I don't, but the reason I don't believe in reincarnation is because it doesn't map onto any standard or model of logic that I can identify with. Did you ever watch the cartoon Avatar: The Last Airbender? Are you familiar with that at all?
No, I'm not.
Series. So basically, it's the idea that there's this very empowered being in the world that has special powers. They die, and then they come back to life as somebody else, a brand new body, a brand new face, a brand new name, and they don't remember who they were before. And my question was, then in what way are they the original person? It doesn't seem meaningful to say it's the same person reincarnated if they don't have the same memories or relationships or personality or anything else. Like, it just isn't a meaningful statement. So, I don't even know what it means to say that somebody's reincarnated.
I've got a little argument going on in the chat. I agree with you that there's no reincarnation. I guess I was bringing that up because some people believe that they're reincarnated depending on what they did on the earth. So there's still like a cosmic justice. But I just, Benjamin Blake is saying early church fathers, kind of questioning the ones that I named. Ignatius of Antioch knew the Apostle John very well. Yes, he did know the Apostle John. And Ignatius of Antioch also, he made a lot of references. He wrote letters, and he was also debunking a lot of the ideas that were poor of his time. Irenaeus was around. He was a disciple of Polycarp. Polycarp was a disciple of John, so we also have that. And Irenaeus wrote a book called Against Heresies, where he spelled out all kinds of heresies. And Jerome wrote a book called Against Helvidius, where he spelled out a bunch of heresies. And a lot of other books were out there with heresies. Justin Martyr wrote his book that was excellent, Dialogue with Trypho, that I just listened to. And there's a lot of good stuff out there that you can look at if you want to see these Gnostic ideas. And it worries me because, James, you started off in one faith, you traveled around with your mom, and then she ended up, is that the last one? She was Jehovah's Witness in the end?
No, so currently she's like a Southern Baptist kind of a person, I think.
Okay.
So she's very anti-JW now, interestingly.
Good. Well, does she pray for you? I'm
sure that she does. Yeah.
Then that's very good. And Otangelo Otangelo, you said, and I agree with you, cosmic justice, divine justice. I think we all need that moral lawgiver to say we have objective morality. I don't know if in both debates, both positions on the other side kind of had more of a relativistic sort of a view, I believe, where they didn't seem to think that we have objective morality, that it just depends on what the culture says. And so do either of you see flaws in when we have a morality based on what the culture says, it can shift like it has been?
Well, first of all, SJ, I would say that if the naturalistic atheistic worldview is true, and if the physical universe really is all there is, then we are inherently living in an extremely unjust world, because people do bad things and horrible things all the time, and very often they are never charged for what they have done. And if there is no deity which actually will judge our actions, then we die and that's it. And it doesn't matter if you lived like a jerk or as a saint. When you are dead, you are dead. It's all over. But if there is a God which actually will judge our lives, as it is stated in the Bible, then we can hope that actually justice one day will be done. And if a mother has a child which was raped and killed, and the perpetrator was never caught, then she can still have hope that one day he will have to face a judging God, which will make justice. So I would say that the Christian worldview is here inherently just, while if the naturalistic atheistic worldview is true, it is an inherently unjust world, and I don't know why someone would actually desire it. And in regards of reincarnation, it is also extremely unjust if, let's suppose that I had a previous life, which today I don't know anything about it, then how and why should I pay for sins that I have committed in a previous life, which I am not even aware of? So this is extremely unjust.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of reincarnation at all, or even the idea that you're reincarnated possibly into a cow.
Yeah, what good's that going to do?
Let's go around. Someone's going to kill me for some steak one day. They won't kill me in India, though. I got it made over there.
I mean,
Right.
we have here in Brazil a religion which is called spiritualism, of people which have contact with the spiritual world and which incorporate spirits, and they also believe in reincarnation. And very recently, I had a dialogue with a spiritualist, and I asked him, well, so what have you been in the past, and how has it started? And well, I started as an amoeba, as a one cell organism, and then I evolved, and here I am now. So to me, this sounds as absolutely absurd.
I understand all of that, but this is another example where it doesn't really map onto my way of thinking. So my concept of justice isn't based on revenge or vengeance or returning pain to pain. It's about restoration. It's about healing. It's about building up and connecting. It's about, no matter how evil somebody has been and what they've done in the world, that what I want to happen to them is to have their brain fixed to where they no longer, for example, have a major personality disorder, to where they actually have reliable data to work with in understanding the world and their place within it, to where they have a healthy set of emotional engagement with all the issues and all the people involved, to where they are personally accountable, right, into where they want to be better, and to where they're capable of being better. And so, even when I think about the people that have done me the most wrong in this world, horrible wrongs, I don't want them to suffer. If they were to die and I don't believe in a God, I wouldn't think, oh, I wish there was a God because I want someone who can make them suffer. I would think I would love the idea of a God because I want someone that'll bring them back to life and heal them. I don't need them to suffer like I've suffered. I just need them healed so that they can be a functionally good person in our world, and so that they can be that, experience that higher state of being. That's it. That's all I want for them. And so, I don't think in terms of I hope people get their revenge. I just think in terms of I want to see everybody be okay.
But James, that's precisely what the Christian faith offers, which is repent from your sins, receive Christ as your Lord and Savior, and then he will have paid for your sins, and you can go free. You won't have to pay for all your wrongdoings. That's exactly what actually what the Christian faith offers,
Right, so
which is restoration.
Well, I appreciate there's a restoration component to it, sure. It's important to understand that I don't think of it in terms of debt, like values are transactional. I just think of it in terms of I feel badly for people that behave badly, that can't, Jeffrey Dahmer, a notorious example from this past century. What he did was just beyond imagining. But I don't want him to suffer for it, right? I want him to be brought back to life and healed, restored. If it's even meaningful to call somebody brought back to life, right? Because I don't know. Like if you remake somebody again, is it really the same person? It's an issue to wrestle with. But people in this world that have major personality disorders, psychopathy, sociopathy, narcissistic personality disorder, they lack the capacity to own what they've done and to care about what they've done. And so in that context, they literally can't repent of what they've done. They can say that they have, but if their only reason they're saying it is because they want a reward for having said some things, then that's not true repentance anyways, right? That's just, hey, I want a reward, and so how about I quit doing the thing? How about I say sorry? And that's not meaningful to me. What's meaningful to me is that they be restored into a state of being where they would no longer want to do those things.
Yeah, but I was telling about real repentance and real change of heart. The Bible tells it being born again spiritually, receiving a new heart, and then your desires change, and rather than your desire to do evil things, you align your desires to what is right. And the Bible gives us a moral standard, which is love your next as yourself. And when we follow that, then the society improves, as we know that our Western world was strongly influenced by precisely this principle, to love our next. And I really don't understand why people desire a non-theistic world where there are absolutely no rules, and we have external rules given to us, but we have to make them up based on society. But then you have Papuas which say, well, let's kill the witch of the neighbor tribe because she is doing witchcraft against us, and if we kill her, then this problem is solved. And then if there is no God, then how can you say that their moral standard and what they are doing is wrong? You cannot. You have to respect it because that's just their social order, and that's their moral standard, which is equal with ours.
I understand. I am here for that conversation if our host wants us to dive into it.
Well, it's interesting. I think you guys are presenting good points of view. I think it's James. You strike me as somebody now that's if you were to be a Christian, you would be probably a universalist. I guess is that fair?
Yeah, that's a fair view.
That's interesting. And Otangelo, I don't think you're a universalist, right?
No, I believe that, as the Bible says, if we are dying in our sins, unrepented, and if you reject what Christ did for us on the cross, paying for our sins, well, then the only justice which is left is that God will judge us, and we will have to pay for our wrongdoings.
That's my belief is there's this one unforgivable sin. Jesus mentions the sin against the Holy Spirit. That's the unforgivable sin. And it's my understanding from listening to a bunch of theologians and people that the one unforgivable sin is when you reject the offer that Jesus is giving you. That's like you openly reject that and walk away.
Yeah, I think this is true. I mean, if you reject Christ, there is no way. Other way, as Jesus said, I am the only way to the Father. And if you reject that, then it's over. There is no alternative.
I understand the theological narrative, and I appreciate that that's yours and that you take comfort from it. It's not my narrative. It doesn't sound reasonable to me. The proposition doesn't.
So, James, when you said you were hurt, like you said, there's been people who've hurt you in your past, and you've forgiven them, really, essentially, as you've forgiven them. So that's actually making you, that's very Christ-like. That's what Christ would advise. Even some of the worst people who've done the worst things, and if you can actually forgive them, that's a really strong Christ-like move.
Well, I appreciate that. with the context of your theological narrative, you see that as the source of those ideas. In the context of my narrative, I don't see it as the source of those ideas. I simply see that theological component as a religion that carried forth those ideas from other people and places that they got the ideas from. I don't think that Christianity or Jesus originated those concepts. I simply think that because those were made popular within that quarter of religion, that because it was made popular, and because the religion then became popular, it then carried that idea forward in kind of a fruit basket of ideas. One of the fruits in that fruit basket was, hey, let's be nice to other people, or let's forgive other people, and things like that. That's in the basket. But I don't think that came off the Jesus tree. I think that these are ideas that they got from other older cultures, and those ideas continued to be alive within the culture from which Christianity began. And then those people, having heard those ideas, said, yes, not only did Jesus hear about these ideas and like them, but we agree with Jesus. These are good ideas. Let's carry them forward. And I think that that's a beautiful and fine project. I just disagree on the history of where the ideas came from.
And actually, I'm not saying that these ideas, all of the, like, for example, love your neighbor as yourself, that's certainly not something that's something that's been through human history. And we would expect in a world that is been granted life by a divine moral lawgiver, that you would see these seeds of Christianity or seeds of those Christian ideas all throughout human history. So like, let me just say, one thing that Jesus did do that was really kind of really unusual during his time, as Dominion's pointed out, the guy who wrote Dominion, Tom Holland, during his time, people thought that the rich were blessed and the poor were cursed, and that kind of thing. And they left a lot of people out to die on the streets. They exposed them, and they did horrible things to the people. And Jesus got out there and he said, not only are we supposed to love our neighbors, we're supposed to love our enemies. And that was something that you didn't hear other people saying. And he said, not only are you not supposed to commit adultery, if you're just even looking at a woman with lustful eyes, you're committing adultery. And he kind of went beyond what was the norm of the time.
Sure. I mean, I'm not a fan of that idea to say that if we even look at somebody with a sense of lust, that we've committed adultery, that it's the same as doing the action. I don't think it's the same as doing the action. And I don't like the idea of being judged for thought crimes. And so, there are some things that the character Jesus said in the literature, maybe he really said those things in real life, that I agree with, and I think are wonderful and lovely. And I'm glad that there was a movement that made those ideas more popular and carried them forward. And then there are other things that I look and I read in the pages and I'm like, not a fan of it at all. So, it's a little bit of each for me.
And I think kind of what it boils down to, and what Otangelo and I are on the same page about, is I like the idea of having a moral lawgiver who's the source of divine ultimate justice, but also ultimate mercy. Like, he's a combination of this love, justice, and mercy that so far exceeds anything we can understand or even grasp. I think that's good, because I think that gives us hope. But when you don't have that in an atheistic point of view, where is your hope? Like, when you look out into the world and you hope for you hope that one day you're going to be aligned with this perfect love, mercy, and justice in peace forever and ever. And you're thinking that you're just going to be worm food.
Oh, I don't have an opinion about what does or doesn't continue after people die. I'm not sure. I don't think that personal identity is as coherent and meaningful of a concept, or isn't even as defined of a concept as people treat it as. I think that our individual sense of identity is mostly illusory, if not entirely. But setting all that aside, I don't have an opinion about what comes after. I just don't. I don't tend to think in terms of moral lawgiver. If there is a source, a pre-existing autonomous source of love and wisdom and justice, and that we're picking up on that we're intuiting that somehow makes its way into our lived experience, then I wouldn't call that a moral lawgiver. I would simply say that it's a source of the things, because when you talk about moral laws, you're talking about dictates and accept this or else. Well, when people feel love, they're not getting that from the idea of do this or else. They're getting it from they simply feel the love. And so they're not relating to love as a law, and they're not relating to love as an obedience. They're simply relating to love as I feel this, I embrace this, I find it to be empowering and nurturing and powerful for other people as well, and I feel compelled to want to share that with other people.
Yeah, I just want to add that love your next as yourself, that wasn't actually invented by Jesus, because they asked him what is the foremost command, and he said, "Have you not read in the scriptures?" And this is from Leviticus 19:18, where it says, "Thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord." So this is already a principle from Leviticus, so very old.
Sure. I mean, there are things Jesus said in the Christian stories that he got. Some of it he got from the Hebrew stories, and they would have gotten theirs from who knows where, right? So, we're all part of this ongoing project that's been going on since before human history. So, and I appreciate that. I think it's a wonderful thing.
Well, I hope you'll look into at least some other spiritual. I mean, I like the idea that you've opened the door to a spiritual world. I think that and then you even open the door saying, hey, there could be an afterlife. I don't know exactly what it is. When I used to kind of look into the Eastern faiths, I thought this whole idea of cosmic dust, and we were all going to get caught up in this gigantic cosmic ice storm at the end of history, and we would all eternally be floating around in the cosmos, sort of as one big part of a unity. And I don't believe that anymore, obviously, but that at least opens the door to some sort of afterlife. And now you have to figure out, well, now, is that an afterlife that is consistent with reality here in this world, or is it an afterlife that is the thought process of maybe an individual in this world?
Yeah, I don't have those answers.
What I think is interesting what you just said, James, and this is really, if you think atheism true, this is really the outcome, which is nihilism, where you have to confess that you are unable to say anything about reality that could convey what is real. And you just said, well, I don't even know if my thoughts are real. And
No, I didn't
Descartes said,
I didn't say
yeah,
that.
okay, maybe I misunderstood you, but Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. And so the thing that you can really be sure about is that your thoughts exist because they are yourself. So this is something which we cannot doubt about.
Sure, thoughts are happening, sure. So, sentience is happening. I think that the self, or a personal identity, is a story that we weave in real time over time, and that changes over time. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't have a story about identity, right? I'm saying that I simply have a different story than you, and it's not crutched on the same kinds of ideas that yours are. I get a different way of making sense of myself than you do. That's all.
Let me, because I'm looking, my dog is looking at me like she wants me to take her out for a while. So let me kind of bring this to a close. If I could have you guys just maybe share some other final opinions or final thoughts, what you're working on and where people can find you. And if you have links you want me to put into the description, I know, Otangelo, where to find you, but I can put your link into anything you want in the description if you guys want.
Sure, I can. I'll grab that here in 1 second. Let me come back over here to my search bar. So, okay, James Apperson. So I appreciate the time and your patience, right? And I know I get long-winded at times. My effort was to try to explain some examples of how your ideas, your theological narrative simply doesn't map onto mine. This isn't to say that you're wrong, right? It's just simply to say that I would have to change so much about the way that I think about personal identity and value and moral ideals that we couldn't see that process through to the transition without a much larger conversation and a much larger set of discoveries. But let me go ahead and grab this link real quick. I'll grab it. I'll drop it in private chat right here.
Thanks. I got Otangelo's link. I'm trying to put this, gotta find the content.
You can maybe put the second link in the description, which is a new book, which I actually published a couple of days ago. Its name is Unraveling the Theistic Worldview, Navigating Life's Deepest Questions. It is quite a big book. It has 590 A4 pages. And it goes through several different topics, which is theism, who is God, atheism, intelligent design, origin and fine-tuning of the universe, origin of life, and consciousness. So I think very, very interesting. It goes into the three big open questions in science, which is the origin of the universe, life, and consciousness. And from these three things, I show why I think that the theistic worldview is a superior explanation to no God, or to naturalism and atheism.
Well, I appreciate that. If anybody in chat or listening to this would like to, if they appreciate the way that I engage with the issues, even if they disagree with me, and would like to have a conversation about these things over at my space, please feel free to come over and we can do that.
Yeah, and I apologize for me. I was a little short with you when you were talking about something. I was trying to get another point out, and it was my fault for being a little short there. So thank you for being so kind.
And thank you for being patient. I am long-winded. I'm known for that.
I'm long-winded too, so I can appreciate that.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, well, thank you everybody for coming in here. If you guys like this kind of content, I noticed a couple people subscribed, so I really appreciate that. I think I was mentioning I was hemorrhaging over the last 2 weeks. I've been hemorrhaging people, so now I've gotten a few people back, so that's always fun. I'm going to have William Albrecht on my channel at 6:00 Eastern on Wednesday night. We're going to talk about his book on transubstantiation. Otangelo, I love having authors on, so I should probably get a hold of your book so I can interview you about your words. And James, I see some good links here. I put those in the description. I also put Otangelo stuff in the description, so you guys go pick that stuff up, take a look, and follow these guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So everybody just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Thank you.